Most of the time, the athlete you expect to win does. Usain Bolt flies past the finish line, leaving his opponents in a cloud of dust. Michael Jordan scores his 60th point of the game after a last-minute fadeaway jump shot. Mike Tyson counters with a right uppercut and scores yet another KO. The champion stays on top. Everyone collects their betting money. Nobody's surprised. But every once in a while, the 10-to-1 underdog, who nobody expected, does the unthinkable. David beats Goliath, and the course of history changes in the blink of an eye. Back in the early 90s, a time when motorsport was dominated by Europe, Japan shocked the world with one of the biggest upset wins in racing history. And it pulled it off with a car that nobody expected, the Mazda 787B. With a novel new engine design, Mazda catapulted its reputation and secured Japan's place at the table in the world of motorsports. After the race, everyone knew it. There was a new player in the game, and Japan was a force to be reckoned with. This is how Mazda, against all odds, conquered Le Mans. Le Mans, 1991, the Super Bowl of motorsports, the oldest and most prestigious racing event on the planet. Run since 1923, the 24-hour endurance race in the heart of France is the ultimate test of man and machine. Winning here didn't just mean crossing the finish line first. It meant becoming a legend and carving your name into the history books forever. The stage was set for another dominant European victory. Jaguar blazed across the finish line, taking the crown in 1990 with the lightning-fast XJR12, and looked to do it again. Mercedes planned to dethrone them with the rapid C11, a car that stunned everyone in the World Sports Car Championships. The race this year was a sea filled with sharks, and Mazda was just another helpless tuna. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. Mazda, overshadowed by their more successful Japanese competitors, were going through a midlife crisis. Honda was blazing a path forward in Formula One with the McLaren Honda MP44. Nissan had a strong presence in the world of motorsports with the R90C, and Toyota was dominating the World Rallying Championship with the silky smooth Celica. Heck, even Subaru was starting to get some podium finishes in the WRC. But what about Mazda? Well, they were kind of like the black sheep of the family. Despite competing since the late 70s, Mazda had failed to rack up a single victory at Le Mans. They dreamed of winning, but they were just one of those teams that turned up to every race but never really made any waves. They did have a promising race car called the MC74, but it broke down and never even finished the race, whilst the RX-7 Le Mans car didn't even qualify. Every year that Mazda entered since the mid-80s, they were crushed by the competition. Taking the crown in 1991 would not only win the status of Mazda in Japan, it would put Japan firmly on the map and let Europe know there was a new sheriff in town. But in everyone's minds, from experts to casual fans, Mazda didn't stand a chance against the titans of Europe. They weren't even on the radar. But Mazda had a secret weapon that everyone overlooked. A weapon that would one day be banned from Le Mans forever: the rotary engine. Unlike the usual piston engines dominating the tracks of Le Mans, Mazda decided to be different. The rotary engine was the brainchild of German engineer Felix Wankel. It was compact, it was powerful, and unlike anything seen before in the world of motorsports. The rotary engine operates on a simple principle. Instead of pistons moving up and down in cylinders, a triangular rotor spins inside an oval chamber. There's a few moving parts, higher revs, and a smoother flow of power. Sounds great, right? So why wasn't everyone using them? Simply put, a lot of people didn't have faith in the rotary engine. It hadn't seen as much experience on the track as the piston engine, so a nasty surprise wasn't out of the question. It also wasn't as fuel efficient, which is important when you're racing for 24 hours straight. Many experts were also questioning its reliability, which in a race like Le Mans could be considered suicide. European teams had been watching Mazda struggle with the rotary engine at Le Mans for years. The criticism was relentless, but despite years of setbacks and challenges, Mazda was convinced they were onto something big, an innovation that would vindicate a history as the underdogs in a single stroke. And they wanted to prove that innovation can beat tradition. But it was a task of Herculean proportions. It wasn't enough to struggle along the finish line. Mazda desperately needed a knockout victory. They needed a new design, more slick and aerodynamic than anything they'd ever created, more powerful with impeccable reliability, and Mazda had no time to lose. At the head of Mazda's leadership and engineering team was Kenichi Yamamoto. To Yamamoto, the rotary engine was the future, and he was there to let the world know. Alongside well-known car designer Nigel Stroud, they pushed Mazda to the brink, working day and night to create the car that would shock the world. The result was nothing short of a masterpiece. That masterpiece was the 787B. Adorned in the iconic orange and green, the 787B was a vast improvement over the 787. Its four-rotor 26B Wankel engine was an example of genius-level engineering. Not only was it capable of producing 900 horsepower, it had a distinctive sound. While traditional piston engines roared and growled, the rotary engine screamed and howled like a banshee. It was perfect. The design was practically flawless. It was so efficient and reliable they needed to change racing strategy to accommodate it. The team was convinced this was the car that would win Le Mans 1991, and they wanted it so bad they could almost taste it. But the notorious beast that was Le Mans was merciless to the unprepared. Defeating it would require impeccable preparation. Every component of the 787B needed to be ruthlessly examined, tested, and refined before going into battle. Luckily, the country that spawned Godzilla was no stranger to beast warfare. Japan was well known for its research and development capabilities, and in the lead-up, the 787B was tested obsessively. And at the helm was team leader Takayoshi Ohashi. As a decorated veteran with extensive experience, he would orchestrate the team's strategy. He made sure that pit stop efficiency, driver rotation, and race tactics were planned with surgical precision. Endurance racing is a chess match at high speeds, and Ohashi knew that their strategy could be the key factor that stood between victory or defeat. Another factor that would be crucial in the 11th hour was the drivers. The 787B's driver's seat would be an unconventional choice, to say the least. We have British F1 veteran Johnny Herbert, a man who was never supposed to race again after suffering a devastating leg injury in a crash a few years before. The next driver was the relatively unknown Volker Weidler from Germany. And the final pick was Bertrand Gaucho, a crazy Belgian who, after Le Mans, beat up a taxi driver and wound up in prison, getting himself banned from Formula One. It was a ragtag group of misfits, but they had a job to do, and they were determined to see it through. The testing schedule was as relentless and brutal as it was necessary. The three drivers knew what was at stake, and Kenichi Yamamoto's leadership at Mazda had built a bulletproof culture that galvanized the team, bringing them closer together where other teams would have crumbled under the pressure. On the eve of the race, the final preparations were finished. The team waited with knots in their stomachs. The 787B was loaded for transport. The Mazda team, with their years of preparation and a strange new car, was about to be put to the ultimate test. With the stage set in the most challenging race on the planet, Mazda was ready for battle. And at 3 o'clock in France on the 22nd of June 1991, the race that would go down in the history books began. And the odds were against them from the beginning. Number 55 Mazda 787B is all the way back in 19th place. They had qualified for a better spot, but the top 10 was reserved for those who played by the rules. Something Mazda didn't do at all. Not only did they start at the back, but they also received a penalty of 200 kilograms of ballast added to their car. Yeah, I didn't know this was a thing either. As the race started, the Mercedes Team C11 prototype, piloted by the future 7-time Formula One world champion, Michael Schumacher, quickly pulled ahead, as everyone predicted. But as the race went on, against all odds, there was an unexpected team hot on their heels, the number 55 Mazda 787B, with an engine so loud that audiences had to be warned before it screamed past. Climbed up to 4th place as night fell. This shocked even the Mazda team. Their relentless testing and optimization were working better than expected. Nobody predicted the 787B would even be competitive, let alone challenging. They were seen as the dorky little cousin, and this misjudgment would be everyone's downfall. Mercedes enjoyed pole position, but no matter what they tried, they couldn't shake the rapid 787B, which was closing the distance. And as fate would have it, Lady Fortune smiled upon Mazda at the perfect time. As Mazda nipped at their heels, the Mercedes team started running into serious problems. Their cars started falling apart catastrophically. Number 31's gearbox broke down, and number 32 smashed into debris, allowing the 787B to come screaming into second place. Everyone was stunned. How could this be happening? At this point, every TV set in Japan was tuned to the race. Mazda looked like a different monster this year, but Mercedes was a wounded tiger, injured but still very dangerous. The only one left that stood in Mazda's way was Schumacher. They still had a solid lead, and Mazda was going to have to pull something out of the bag to close it. But with only a couple of hours left, the stars aligned for Mazda again. The Mercedes started to overheat. Schumacher has no choice but to pull into the pit, allowing the 787B to take the lead. People from all over the world crowd around TVs screaming in disbelief. This weird little team from Japan was making Porsche, Mercedes, and Jaguar breathe its exhaust fumes, and there was nothing they could do about it. But the race wasn't over. The final driver for Mazda was the battered Brit, Johnny Herbert. Mazda couldn't afford to allow Mercedes to get back into the race. Team leader Ohashi gave the order. Herbert would need to pull a double stint. By the end of the race, Herbert was severely dehydrated. He was nearly passing out at the wheel. Completely exhausted and barely able to keep his eyes open, he pushed himself beyond his limits to keep pace. It's a 24-hour race, remember. As he crossed the checkered line first place, the Mazda team, along with the entire world, sat in stunned silence. They had just done the unthinkable. They had pulled off one of the greatest upsets in motorsports history, dethroning Mercedes and shocking the world. Herbert, needing to be pulled out of his car and put into an ambulance, couldn't even make it to the podium. In the greatest endurance race on the planet, and after decades of losses, setbacks, and failures, Mazda was vindicated. They had made motorsports history, and Japan had finally earned the respect of Europe as an equal. In the world of motorsports, it was as if a meteorite had landed. Rules and regulations were being changed left and right and center in the wake of the race as everyone scrambled to understand what happened. Not only did Mazda prove that the rotary engine could hang with the traditional piston engines, the FIA, Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, even deemed the rotary engine a downright unfair advantage. Before the race, the rotary was a laughable nuisance, but after Mazda's win, they realized that it was lighter and far more powerful than its European counterparts. Regulations were changed, and after 1991, the rotary engine was banned from competition. Mazda was so successful, they rewrote the rulebook.